Okay, so welcome to this particular playlist on virtual machines in Azure. Now, in this particular playlist, I'm not just going to talk about the basics of creating virtual machines, but I'm also going to talk about a few more advanced functionalities when it comes to virtual machines in Azure. So this is going to be a very long and elaborate playlist. So before we start off this particular series, a few things to remember is that you have to have your Azure portal already set up. Now, a link on how you can do that I'll give in the description below. So once you have your portal set up, a few things that you will notice that you will have a default user. So this is the default user for my particular account, and this particular default user is also connected to a subscription. So if you open this particular subscription, you can see that I have an active subscription. So these are two things that you should always remember, and these are two things that you must have before you can proceed with this particular tutorial. So let's kick off things by creating a virtual machine. So all that you need to do is you can go to your all services and click on compute, and you can click on virtual machine. Now another way of doing it is you can also type for virtual machine here as well, and you'll get the same result. So let's open this virtual machine. So as you can see that I've already created a virtual machine. So what I'll do is I'll create another virtual machine for this particular example. So let's click on create virtual machine. So since this is the first particular topic on this particular subject, so let's start off by creating a very simple virtual machine. So I'll leave most of the fields as default, and as we progress in this particular playlist, I'll explain to you the most of the advanced functionalities when it comes to virtual machines. So let's start off by selecting the subscription. Now since I have only one subscription, so this particular drop down will just give me one option, and here you have the option of choosing a resource group, either creating a new one or choosing an existing one. So let's create a resource group. Now one thing to remember about a resource group is that it is basically a container that holds all resources within a particular application or a project. Now to learn more about resource group, I'll give you another video over here. You can just check out that particular video. So let's give a name for our particular virtual machine. So let's just call this as my first virtual machine. Now here you need to choose the region in which you want your virtual machine to be. Now you can choose either the one which is nearest to you, or you can choose the one which will target your audience. So let's suppose that you're creating an application for the US, then it's preferable to have your virtual machine set in the US itself. So let's create our virtual machine in US East. So once you've chosen the region, the next thing that we can talk about is the availability option. Now let's click on no infrastructure required for this particular chapter. Now the others are something that I'll talk about in the upcoming chapters. And similarly with security, let's just choose the standard security for this particular video. And now let's choose the image. So here is where you can define which particular operating system you want your virtual machine to run. So here the options that you have are basically either Windows or Linux. So based on what your application requires, you can choose either one. So let's, for this particular example, choose Ubuntu. And here you can choose the memory and the CPU for your virtual machine. So this basically depends on what kind of application you're running. If you're running just a very simple web server, then a general purpose would suffice. Now if you want to run something that is more CPU intensive, then you can choose one of the other series of virtual machine sizes. So it's based completely on the kind of application you're running. So for this particular example, let's choose the bare minimum one, that is the one which has just 0.5 memory and 1 vCPU. And here you can also get the pricing for all of them. So let's just click on this. Let's select this, and here it shows around 273 rupees per month. So after you've done that, you can choose the account type. So here you have the option of either an SSH key or a password. So for this particular example, let's choose the password. And here you just need to give a username and a password. So in the upcoming chapter, we'll talk about how you can create your virtual machine using the public key. So for this example, let's just choose the password. So let's give a name for our password. Let's just call this as let's just call the user as my user. And let's give a password. So let's give a appropriate password. And here you also need to set the public inbound and outbound. Now since I'm going to connect it using putty, so I'll just keep this inbound port open for 22, and that's the bare minimum that is required to create a virtual machine. So all that I've done is I've just opened port 22 for this particular virtual machine, and the virtual machine that I'm going to create is going to have one CPU, 0.5 GB memory, and it's going to run an Ubuntu operating system. So let's click on review and create. And let's click on create. So when I click on create, it's not just the virtual machine that gets created. There are other different services that gets created as well. Now, those are things that I'll talk about in the upcoming chapter. So for this particular chapter, all that I want you to know is how you can create a virtual machine and how easy it is to do so. And once I've created this virtual machine, I'll log in using putty. So let's wait for this deployment to finish. Okay, so my deployment is done. So let's go to my resource. So here what I need to fetch is the public IP. So let me just copy this. And let's connect to this particular virtual machine using our putty. So let's log into putty. And let's connect to the hostname. So the only thing I need to specify here is basically the IP address and port 22. And I'll be connecting using SSH. And that's it. Let's click on open. Click on yes. So you know the username that you had previously created. So for me, it was my user. And I just need to give my password. And you're able to log in. So this is basically my Ubuntu virtual machine. So this is how you can create your virtual machine. So I hope this was useful. I will see you in the next chapter where we'll use our public key to do the same. So I'll see you there.